This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Hannah Viviers in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. More countries detect a new variant of the coronavirus. Police officers in Spain rally against proposed changes to anti-terrorism and gag laws. And Australia to send more troops and police to Solomon Islands to quell protests there. Well, more nations are detecting a new variant of the coronavirus. Great Britain, Germany, Italy, and the Czech Republic are the latest to have found cases of Omicron as more countries roll out travel restrictions. Israel has become the first to ban the entry of all foreigners. The United States, Europe, and South Korea are among those limiting travel from southern Africa, where Omicron was first detected. South Africa says it's being punished for its ability to detect the strain early. They are concerned that travel bans will further hurt tourism there. Oil prices also saw their biggest single-day slump since the early days of the pandemic. Michael Voss has more.
More flight disruptions just as the world was gearing up for mass travel over Christmas. Now travellers are stranded at Johannesburg Airport, wondering when they'll be able to leave.
I'm not happy with the situation because I booked my flight on time. Everything was on time. Now I'm inconvenienced because I had to be at work tomorrow, but then they cancelled the flight.
South Africa has called the travel bans draconian, while the World Health Organization suggests it's unlikely to stop the new virus spreading, and new cases are already being seen outside of Africa. But much of Europe is going through a fourth wave of infections and feels it needs to act.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly, decisively and united. The European Commission has today proposed to Member States to activate the emergency brake on travel from countries in southern Africa.
Britain has recorded more than 50,000 new cases a day, though hospital admissions and deaths are not rising as fast. Apart from the travel ban, there are no new restrictions planned here. Many other European countries, though, are cracking down. The Netherlands has the toughest new rules, announcing a strict 12-hour curfew.
With effect from Sunday, November 28th, everything in the Netherlands will in principle be closed between 5 o'clock in the evening and 5 o'clock in the morning. Theatres, cinemas, hairdressers and event halls. I could go on.
The news, though, was met by noisy demonstrations. It's a problem many EU governments face, with protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations. The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news of the new Omicron variant, with stock markets in Europe and the US suffering their biggest falls in more than a year. Just how dangerous this new variant is remains unknown. The rush is now on to determine if it's more infectious, causes more severe outcomes, or is resistant to current vaccines. It could take several weeks before the results are in. Michael Voss, CGTN.
Well, as we heard in that previous report, scientists are racing to better understand the new variant. Experts are concerned that it could be more infectious and more resistant to vaccines, but many questions still remain.
The WHO said the earliest known case of the Omicron variant was November 9th when a specimen was collected, and South Africa first reported it to the health body on November 24th. Studies show Omicron has more than 30 mutations on the spike protein, which is the part the virus uses to get into the cells it attacks. That is double the number associated with the Delta variant. South African medics said Omicron cases have so far appeared primarily in young people, leaving them exhausted and with body aches and soreness. The WHO also said Omicron may spread more quickly, and early evidence suggests an increased risk of reinfection. Scientists also stressed that there is still a lot we don't know about Omicron, including whether it is indeed more contagious, whether it causes more severe cases, or its effect on vaccine efficacy.
Hong Kong has reported 2 cases of this new variant. One arrived from South Africa, the other stayed at the same quarantine hotel. Ann Cheng has more details on the government's response.
Vaccinated residents traveling from Hong Kong from 8 African countries must now spend their first week of mandatory quarantine at Penny's Bay Quarantine Center, which is the city's only quarantine facility. Those African countries include South Africa, Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Mozambique, Malawi, Namibia, and Zimbabwe. And then at Penny's Bay, these people will then have to go through daily testing every day for the 7 days that they're there. And then they'll complete the remainder of their quarantine at a quarantine hotel, which is another 2 weeks. Meanwhile, non-Hong Kong residents who've been in those 8 African countries in the past 21 days of boarding their flight are banned from entering the city, while unvaccinated residents from those places aren't allowed into the city as well. Now, because the Omicron variant has been detected in other places like Israel and Belgium, the government has also contacted health authorities there to facilitate further risk assessments. And it's not just Hong Kong enacting those travel curbs. Other places and countries are also doing the same for those traveling from Hong Kong. So, for example, Russia has barred non-citizen travelers from Hong Kong from entering into its country, and that's in effect starting today. For Switzerland, those flying in from Hong Kong must present a negative COVID test and be in quarantine for 10 days. Officials in the Philippines are also contemplating a ban on travelers from Hong Kong. And meanwhile, Pakistan has placed a complete ban for everyone traveling from Hong Kong.
Australia says it's sending more soldiers and police to Solomon Islands to help restore calm there. Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced the decision after several days of protests turned violent, leaving 3 people dead and over 100 arrested.
It is not for us to be interfering in their democracy. It's not for us to be interfering in how they resolve those issues. We are just simply there as a good family member to try and provide a stable and safe environment for the issues that are there in the Solomon Islands to be peacefully worked through.
The Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands requested Australia to send peacekeepers. He's blaming foreign interference for the unrest, which was partly sparked by his decision 2 years ago to switch diplomatic relations from Taiwan to the Chinese mainland. But critics say economic frustrations have also led to the crisis. The nation of around 700,000 people has been plagued by ethnic and political tensions for decades. Well, thousands of police officers in Spain are protesting proposed changes to anti-terrorism and gag laws. They worry that the moves will undermine their authority. But its supporters say the laws must be changed to protect their rights. Rahul Pathak has more from Madrid.
Well, as you can see, this is a very public protest. Police officers from all around the country have gathered here in Madrid to protest against the reform of the Citizen Safety Law, a law which, among other things, limits the right to public protest. Now, popularly known as the gag law, the legislation was brought in 6 years ago by the then right-wing conservative Spanish government. It was introduced in 2015 following a big rise in public demonstrations protesting at rights in public services as a result of the global economic crisis. Now, the law limits the right to legal assembly, as well as giving police increased stop and search powers. Another controversial aspect is the one that allows authorities to fine journalists who distribute unauthorized images of police, something that media organizations say is an attack on the freedom of the press. For their part, the majority of police unions say the gag law is a vital tool in protecting the security of Spanish citizens, and that any reform would undermine the authority of the police.
The changes they want to make will make our jobs way more difficult. Our hands are now basically tied, which means safety for the general public will be made worse.
The government wants to remove the need for people to notify authorities when they want to protest. We don't understand that, since our job is to ensure citizens' safety.
The reform of the gag law was one of the major promises made by Pedro Sanchez when he first became Prime Minister in 2018. Ironically, though, his socialist government has actually used the legislation more than any other administration, mainly during the coronavirus lockdown of 2020. However, reforming the law may not be that straightforward. The right-wing opposition have said they'll vote against it when it comes before Parliament, and the leader of the main opposition PP party has said even if it goes through Parliament, he will take the issue to the Spanish Constitutional Court. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
We head over to India, where police say at least 18 people have been killed and many others injured in a road accident in the eastern Indian state of West Bengal. The accident happened late Saturday night in Nadia district, about 164 kilometers north of the state capital, Kolkata. Police say the victims were mourners en route to the cremation of the body of a relative. Their vehicle collided with a stationary truck. Police cite thick fog and the high speed of the vehicle as factors. The British media has identified the first victim of a tragedy involving migrants trying to cross the English Channel. The BBC says 24-year-old Mariam Nuri Mohammed Amin was among the 27 people who drowned Wednesday. She was a Kurdish woman from Iraq on her way to see her fiancé. The migrants were trying to reach the UK from France when their dinghy deflated. It's the worst tragedy on record in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. It has also strained ties between France and Britain. France is hosting a meeting of European ministers on Sunday to discuss ways to stop migrants from crossing the Channel, but Britain is excluded.
قسەکەم تەبەن دەژیران ئەوە دەژیرانی ویە ویستی بچتە کندە ژیرانەکەی خۆی لەوێندەرێ دەوڵەتی بەریتانیا شەنیانی بەو شێوە هەڵبژاری کە جێگای خۆشی و ئەمن و مەسەلەن قانونی و ئەو شتانە یانی خەڵک یانی لە خۆشی ژیان یانی لەوێندەرێ مەسەڵ بارەکەوە یان کۆچەکاتن بەسەڵ مهم قەدەری خۆی وا بوو یانی شتەکە نەگەیشت.
Over in Afghanistan, the Taliban prime minister there is defending the group's rule amid a worsening economic crisis. In his first public address since the Taliban took over, Prime Minister Mohammad Hassan Akhund told Afghans that the Taliban was not to blame for the economic collapse or the worsening humanitarian crisis. According to him, the group is trying to repair the corruption and the mismanagement of the ousted government. He also dismissed international demands for a more inclusive cabinet, but urged international charities to continue offering aid. The United Nations has warned that millions of Afghans could plunge further into poverty, the country suffering from one of its worst famines in decades. Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you shortly.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
More countries ban travelers from at least 7 African countries as concern mounts over a new coronavirus variant. Two people killed as the French military faces more protests in Niger and Burkina Faso. China and Africa look to strengthen ties at the 8th Ministerial Conference of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation begins in Dakar, Senegal. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines. In business, multinational firm Shell to prospect for oil and gas deposits along South Africa's coastline. And in sport, CAF Congress in Cairo endorses FIFA's controversial proposal of a 2-year World Cup. Well, countries around the world are racing to contain the Omicron variant, which is reported to carry a higher risk of infection. Cases of the coronavirus variant have now been detected around the world, including in Botswana, the UK, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Israel, Hong Kong, and the Czech Republic. Even though epidemiologists say that travel restrictions may be too late to stop the variant from circulating globally, many countries, including the US, Indonesia, Kuwait, Brazil, Canada, Egypt, and the European Union nations, have suspended travel from southern African countries. Meanwhile, Dutch health authorities say that 61 people who arrived in Amsterdam on 2 flights from South Africa on a Friday tested positive for COVID-19. The country is conducting further testing to see if any of the infections are of the Omicron variant. Well, CGTN's Angela Coppola has more from the Angolan capital of Luanda. Hi there, Angela. More countries banning travel from South Africa. How are authorities in South Africa responding to this move, Angela?
So from South Africa's side, our authorities are quite unhappy about what happened. We call it the knee-jerk reaction. And we, from the South African Medical Association, we fully agree with.
Well, we're supposed to be talking to Angela, who is in Luanda. Let's just ask that question to Angela again. Angela, more countries are banning travelers from South Africa. How are authorities in South Africa reacting to the new variant? We seem to have lost Angela there. Hopefully we'll be able to get him back on the program later on. Well, for more insights on that story, we're joined by Dr. Angelique Kutsia from Johannesburg, South Africa. Dr. Angelique is the chairperson of the South African Medical Association. Thank you so much for being on Africa Live, Doctor. While various countries are banning travelers from countries that have reported the Omicron variant, the World Health Organization, on the other hand, has been suggesting that this may be too late and banning travel might not work. Doctor, what other alternatives might be most effective in dealing with this new variant?
Thank you, and good afternoon to all your viewers out there. Yes, from our viewpoint, from the South African Medical Association viewpoint, we think what would have been prudent would have been to say, as our scientists said, listen, this is what we are seeing. We noticed the new variant. We noticed that there are a lot of mutations, but it's still too early to say whether that it's going to mean that going forward we're going to have severe infections. It's going to spread quite fast. You know, it would have been important for the world to take notice and then look at what is unfolding in South Africa. Remember, we didn't pick up the virus first in South Africa. It is just that our scientists detected it here, but I'm quite sure it's been in other countries for some time, and that our scientists did what they were supposed to do. That's their duty, to say their ethical duty and obligation to say, listen, this is a new variant. Let us sit and discuss it with other countries. Let's look at the regulations that one can do and what would be our options. So instead of doing any of this, we just less than 24 hours of announcing what we are seeing in South Africa, we have been cut off the world, you know, especially with UK in the front. I think it's badly handled. And again, it would have been much better to have negotiations asking us what we are seeing. You know, currently in Gauteng, and the Pretoria is a place where I am practicing, we are the epicenter. Yesterday, the total patients that has been tested positive in Gauteng was 2,264 patients out of 10,000 that has been vaccinated. And the total amount in South Africa yesterday was 3,000, I think 3,000 around 700 patients been tested positive. And the death rate was 8. So those 8 patients, it's not to say that they are part of Omicron, that can be still part of Delta. We don't know how long they have been in the hospital, as we only started to see the clinical picture around about the 18th of November. And it's mild symptoms. So we're not even having a problem in our surgeries currently, with a lot of people coming and an overload of patients to our hospitals. But if you listen to the rest of the world, it is a disaster that struck South Africa. And
Doctor, I would like to ask you, and I think you've alluded to this, but other health experts are also saying that South Africa is essentially what it seems as though being punished for leading and detecting this new variant. What does that do just in terms of reporting? And I mean, I don't think South Africa would stop reporting if they were to detect new variants, and other countries wouldn't either. But what does this mean? And other experts saying that they've quoted that this is unwarranted. This panic that we're seeing is completely unwarranted at this stage. What are your thoughts on that?
Fully agree. Panic is unwarranted at this stage. We don't even know going forward how many severe cases there would be. We don't even know whether vaccinated people will end up in hospital. For what we have seen up till now, in most of the surgeries, that these vaccinated people who got this Omicron has been treated safely at home. Most of them have already been recovered. And so the unvaccinated people. It's not to say that going forward that the picture will change. So what does this tell us? That it tells us that you are being punished if you speak the truth. And this will lead for going forward to countries on the political decision-making field not being open about this and transparent. Because the moment you are transparent and open, you are slapped with what we have seen happen to South Africa, with disastrous effect on our economy. And we have said before, no one is safe until everyone is being vaccinated. And that includes Africa. And we have said that the variants will most probably originate from Africa because of the high HIV load in Africa, not only in South Africa. South Africa is just in a better position to have better lab vigilance than the rest of Africa. And if this current gathering of vaccines keeps on escalating and not getting Africa to come to the party, this will happen again and again. So are you going to close your borders every time?
Dr. Kutsia, where you talk about the vaccination and how important that is for the continent, it's been reported that health authorities in Botswana had said that the 4 cases that they had initially detected there had all been people who had been fully vaccinated. What are your insights on that?
Exactly. We have always said that if you are vaccinated, your chances of getting mild disease are there. What we do say, however, why do we vaccinate? We vaccinate to keep you 95% out of hospital with severe cases and prevent you from death. And this would now be put to the task or test going forward to see how many people that's been vaccinated will get severe diseases. Botswana didn't say to you that those 4 people died. That's not what they said to you. They haven't even comment on the clinical picture as what we are now in South Africa doing and telling the world. That is what we are seeing. We're not seeing severe people with severe disease. Not meaning this is what we currently are seeing. It might change going forward.
Thank you so much,
But for now, that's it.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Angelique Coetzee from South Africa. Dr. Angelique is the chairperson of the South African Medical Association. Let's take a look at Sudan's domestic politics. More former ministers and officials have been released from detention in Sudan a week after the prime minister was reinstated by the military. Several high-profile politicians remain in custody. CGTN got reactions to these latest developments.
This arrest was and still is unacceptable to us. I think that our absence from the world in this forced form calls for an investigation on personal and partisan levels. We will carry out legal actions. The way in which we were arrested was abusive and humiliating and included a lot of violence. That was in addition to the days we spent in detention. I think the party that made the arrests must be questioned and they must be held accountable.
This step would add to this agreement a slight credibility, especially since the people still do not accept the measures that were taken against the constitutional document, in which many articles were cancelled by Air Burham and are considered by the people as a coup against the constitutional document and a coup intended by the army to seize power.
In Niger, at least 2 people have been killed and 18 others injured in the western part of the country after protesters clashed with a French military convoy. According to Niger's government, the protesters blocked a French military convoy after it had crossed the border from Burkina Faso. The armored vehicles and logistics trucks had been blocked in Burkina Faso for a week by demonstrations there. Anger about France's military presence in its former colonies has been rising in countries in the Sahel region. The protesters are against French forces' failure to stop mounting violence by Islamist militants. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, protesters took to the streets to demonstrate against the continued militant violence there. Police used tear gas against the demonstrators. The march was not authorized by the government officials. Protesters burned tires and attacked a government building. This comes 2 weeks after an attack by Al-Qaeda-linked militants left 51 people dead, including 49 police officers. Opponents of President Roch Kabore called for renewed protests in response to this. France is also facing opposition from a section of Burkina Faso's population. Last week, demonstrators blocked a French military convoy headed towards Niger. President Kabore has, on his part, vowed to combat what he terms as dysfunction in the army. Let's now take a short break and return. More on Africa Live, including China and Africa look to strengthen ties as the 8th ministerial conference of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation begins in Dakar, Senegal. And attacks on women and children are on the rise in South Africa. We tell you how some women there are trying to protect themselves.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
8th Ministerial Conference of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation is set to kick off in Senegal's capital, Dakar. Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to deliver the keynote speech via video link. The two-day conference will begin on Monday. FOCAC is comprised of 55 members, including 53 African countries, China, and the African Union Commission. Senegal's Minister of Culture and Communication, Abdoulaye Diop, says the forum will be a great moment for meetings and exchanges. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Nick Mudimba, who is in Dakar, Senegal. Good to see you, Nick. What is the main agenda and expected outcomes of this meeting?
Thank you very much, Hannah. Of course, as you said earlier, the FOCAC forum will actually be going down here in Dakar, Senegal from tomorrow, and the forum will actually be ending on Monday. So this time around, this year, the agenda is actually to strengthen and deepen African relationship with China. And of course, you're aware the COVID-19 pandemic slowed things down. But this time around, the deliberations are actually be coming through to help Africa as a continent realize how important it is to be actually a calamity or disaster ready, because now the COVID-19 pandemic has really destabilized so much. So COVID-19 will actually be one of the key agendas to be discussed in this year's forum. Also, you're aware that trade ties between Africa and China really increased, actually, something not many expected. And this time round, that will also be one of the agendas. Health system, security, innovation, technology, all under one roof will also be discussed here in Dakar, Senegal. Something else, Hannah, is that the COVID-19 pandemic has taught African nations how just important it is to make sure structures are well placed. So the FOCAC forum will be here to address all these things, the challenges, what happened. And as you're all aware that the infrastructural setup in Africa has largely been boosted by China. These will also be one of the agendas to be discussed here. The deliberations will be coming soon on 30th, and we'll be keeping you posted on what the agenda is, the deliberations, and how African countries are actually continuing to enjoy this aid.
Thank you for all that, Nick. We'll continue to hear from you as the meeting progresses. Well, ahead of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, CGTN spoke with former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo. He is now co-chair of the Interaction Council of Former Heads of Government. Obasanjo gave us his thoughts on the concept of a shared future for mankind.
What is important for me is shared future. Now, our future globally now are so intricately interrelated and woven together that if the future of Africa is uncertain, it has implication for the rest of the world. And you take the pandemic particularly, Africa should be able to get the drugs that it will need for her basic health care. And there's no reason why China should not give a helping hand in that respect. And because we are talking of shared future, and this is, the pandemic knows no boundary, knows no race, knows no political system. I believe particularly this FOCAC that is coming 29-30 in Senegal, I think that shared future should be spelled out in specific areas.
Well, reports indicate that attacks on women and children are getting worse in South Africa. As a result, an increasing number of females are taking up guns. A national strategic plan put in place last year has done little to curb the violence. Nonprofit organization Girls on Fire has decided that women should take back their power, and it's training women to defend themselves using guns. CGTN's Julie Shire brings us that report.
The sound of gunfire is usually associated with crime. But these South African women who live in fear every day are learning to protect themselves.
I currently live in a very unsafe community. One of the reasons that I'm here today is because of that. So I really want to protect my family. I have kids, very young. So we're being targeted where I come from. So I feel the need for security. And one of the first steps is actually getting a gun, because we're being targeted with guns.
I think the biggest concern is making the call and waiting for 2 hours for help. I think in some way or other, everyone has experienced needing help from the police and being told that there isn't enough vehicles, sorry, we can't send anybody. So what do I do in that instance when I'm alone with my 9-year-old daughter?
The women have joined a Girls on Fire campaign to defend themselves. It coincides with 16 days of activism against gender-based violence.
We're a country with very fantastic laws. Implementation is a problem. We talk a lot, we don't act. And Girls on Fire is meant to act. And that's why today we're launching the 16 days of action, not activism, action, because we're taking action against gender-based violence in our country.
Women have previously taken to the streets to urge the government to act. Laws are being tightened, but rape, murder and abuse have all jumped significantly through the lengthy lockdown.
We want women to take their own safety into their own hands. We don't want women to be stopped from, going to the mall because they fear being attacked. We don't want women to stop going hunting or camping or whatever the case is just by virtue of being a woman.
Young girls who are often victims of crime are also being taught the art of handling weapons.
To have this opportunity to learn how to use a self-defense weapon is actually great, because once you disarm the person that is attacking you, you can self-defend yourself and get out the situation as quick as possible.
South Africa's gun laws, however, are under review. If they take effect, guns may not be used for self-defense, a blow for women who feel let down by the state and are finding ways to protect themselves and their children. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Well, over in Egypt, the capital Cairo is hosting its annual Honey Festival. The 4-day event will bring together 100 beekeepers from across the region to create awareness among the public about the benefits of honey and the different types found there. There will also be a forum to discuss bee farming. Here's CGTN's Adel Moroki with that report.
Cairo residents excitedly joined the third Honey Festival. This is a unique event that brings together producers and consumers so as to create awareness about bee products.
Actually, it's my first time to attend the Honey Festival. I had a friendship with one of the sellers here, so I came to see the products, and at the same time I took a trip over the other producers to take a look on the honey bee products, and it's really interesting. A lot of products are available here. You get the chance to compare and choose the best out of them. So this is a very good opportunity for whoever wants to look for the best offers, the highest discounts.
The festival, however, is not only about selling honey. It's a platform to display the newest products and the latest developments in the industry.
This year we have new honey products that have zero saccharose. The honey comes from flowers that grow organically, and we started to decrease the level of saccharose in the honey using certain technologies which makes honey safer for people with diabetes and for those who are on diet.
Egyptian honey producers created this event largely for the local market, yet the festival has started to attract producers from the Middle East.
I always come to this festival because it is useful in terms of exchange of knowledge. Honey is not just about production. Packaging techniques are also very important, like how to prepare your display for fairs. The lectures and forums are very helpful as well when it comes to issues like bee diseases and their cures.
Egypt is known for producing many kinds of honey. The most common are marjoram, nigella, clover, citrus, cedar and caraway. Producers say there is still huge potential to grow.
The visitors this year, I think, are more than those at previous editions of the festival. The number of producers has also grown, and I see my competitors are doing great work. I hope that the festival would encourage businessmen to invest in honey production. Bees are the driving forces of agriculture. They are the most important part of the agricultural cycle. The government is launching new cultivation projects that will need bees.
Egyptian studies suggest that citizens here consume as little as 200 grams of honey a year. Europeans' honey intake, on the other hand, is 10 times that amount. And this is a promising indication to both how much domestic sales could grow and how much honey could be exported. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Your business news is coming up after this short break, including multinational firm Shell to prospect for oil and gas deposits along South Africa's coastline.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Taking a look now at the day's business news. South Africa will not renew temporary work permits of around 250,000 Zimbabweans working in the country when their visas expire next month. That's according to Mondli Gungebele, a minister in President Cyril Ramaphosa's office. Some 250,000 Zimbabweans fleeing political and economic crises at home were granted 4-year work visas back in 2009. The visas have been repeatedly extended, but the South African government has announced that there will be no further extensions. The workers have been given a year's grace to apply for alternative visas that may be applicable to individual situations. Thousands of Zimbabweans work in South Africa, particularly in the hospitality, retail, and service sectors. Ramaphosa's government is under pressure to create job opportunities for its citizens as ballooning unemployment exceeds 34%. Well, petrochemicals multinational Shell is about to embark on a seismic survey for oil and gas deposits along South Africa's coastline. The company will conduct the seismic blasting just off the country's wild coast in the Eastern Cape. However, the move has been opposed by environmental activists who say that the survey could cause untold damage to the marine environment. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more.
Energy and petrochemicals giant Shell is on the hunt, and they're looking for oil and gas deposits along South Africa's coastline. The company is focusing its efforts on the wild coast and will be conducting a seismic survey for the next 5 months. The move has been welcomed by the African Energy Chamber as a step forward for South Africa's energy independence.
I think what Shell is doing is actually on the right track. There is great potential for gas, for natural gas in that coast, and that could really help, especially if you're telling South Africa to phase out from coal, and then you can discover huge potential of gas. It could also help if you could even discover petroleum. It would help because South Africa is also a net importer of petroleum products. So it is a win-win.
Not everyone sees it that way, though, and some environmental activists and concerned citizens have staged protests against the move. They believe the seismic blasting, which is the firing of shockwave emissions into the ocean's floor, is detrimental to the marine ecosystem.
The marine life is going to be devastated by the type of exploration that they're doing, and it just seems that it has happened behind closed doors. And Shell can come in and just do what they like, and we are trying to stand up for our ocean and people who quietly fish the oceans and don't do any harm.
While the right to protest the move has been welcomed, some believe the country needs new energy sources to move beyond the constant load shedding, and this could assist in those efforts.
Shell reached out to the affected communities and traditional leaders and has had constant engagement with them. And you're really talking to the people. Shell has reached out to the government. They have done various environmental impact evaluations, and then it all came out positive that this work can go through.
Now, these seismic surveys will be conducted 20 kilometers offshore to check if there's sufficient quantities for exploration. The move also comes after Total Energy struck luck with their drilling campaign recently further down that coastline. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
For many people, their interest in virtual reality is for fun, games, and entertainment. But a Belgian company is focusing on practical uses for this technology. Giles Gibson has more from Brussels.
A fire breaks out on a subway platform, smoke filling the air. But don't worry, it's not real. That virtual fire was started by Belgian company One Bonsai, which designs virtual reality training services used by the police, the military and private companies.
The concept of metaverse is the concept of having a parallel digital universe with the universe that we live in, so from like real world. And here at One Bonsai we have actually a virtual reality training metaverse, meaning that anybody like you could just jump into a training, somebody else from anywhere else in the world could actually join your training.
With cutting-edge VR hardware, the company can place you in a specially designed scenario where you learn by doing. So instead of doing my fire safety training in this boring office, I can put on this virtual reality headset. I then pick up this specially adapted fire extinguisher, and then now I am learning to put out this fire. After rebranding its parent company as Meta, Facebook announced plans to create 3D spaces for business meetings, games, or just hanging out with friends. However, as the tech giant battles yet another scandal, there are concerns that its plans for the metaverse could give Facebook even more control over how we use the internet. A former Facebook employee who leaked thousands of internal documents to US media and regulators addressed the European Parliament earlier this month.
My name is Frances Haugen. I used to work at Facebook and joined the company because I believe Facebook has the potential to bring out the best in us. But I am here today because I believe that Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, weaken our democracy, and much more.
In reporting dubbed the Facebook Files, the Wall Street Journal accused the company of knowing its platforms are, quotes, riddled with flaws that cause harm and doing nothing about it. The company says the newspaper chose selectively, quotes, from internal company documents to present a narrative that's simply wrong.
So this is actually a stock headset made by Facebook and like the daughter company of Facebook, Oculus.
Back at One Bonsai, the team works with a variety of kits, including Facebook-owned Oculus headsets, a big player in the VR market. But whichever company ends up dominating this new frontier of the internet, in some ways, the metaverse has already arrived. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Brussels.
The sport news is coming up after the show break, including CAF Congress in Cairo endorses FIFA's controversial proposal of a 2-year World Cup.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We begin our sports coverage with football in Egypt, where the Confederation of African Football has backed the contentious proposal to hold the FIFA World Cup every 2 years. This followed a FIFA presentation to CAF's General Assembly in Cairo on Friday. The Congress also discussed the organization's budget and approved the creation of the African Super League. CGTN's Adel Mruhi was there and now reports.
CAF's General Assembly convened in the Egyptian capital Cairo to approve its first budget and set a developmental plan for African football. The assembly took place as fears of a new COVID-19 variant sweeps through the continent. New containment measures to curb the spread of the disease could soon be enforced across Africa, hitting, among others, the January African Cup of Nations finals in Cameroon.
About this new variant that is so much more transmissible, and the important thing is that it is being assessed, it is being evaluated. Some of the European countries have responded by red listing some countries. So we will be guided by the science. In the meantime, all the plans we have will proceed with all the caution and protocols for COVID-19 as we've had in the past.
CAF has finally approved the birth of a new interclub competition, the African Super League. No details about the competition have been released yet. However, it is expected to include 20 clubs in what officials say will maximize football revenues.
African competitions is only the African Cup of Nations and the World Cup qualifiers that has. But if you want improvement, you must get your major clubs to play on a regular basis. So if we have all of the big clubs on the African continent playing in a league, you are enhancing the profile of the clubs, and if it's televised on a worldwide basis, it will also put focus on both the clubs and on the players.
FIFA's boss Gianni Infantino joined this extraordinary meeting to promote for his new vision of a 48-team World Cup that is held every 2 years. He had a presentation to convince all 54 members of CAF, but he seems to have had CAF's president, Patrice Motsepi's support. Former long-serving Arsenal manager and the chief of FIFA's global football development, Arsène Wenger, presented to the Assembly benefits of a 2-year World Cup. CAF's General Assembly has not yet voted on the initiative. However, a statement from the continental body said that once studies are over, FIFA will have Africa's full support.
There is nothing like playing a big tournament in order to boost the game, in order to create unity, inclusion in a country and between countries. So to create more of these opportunities is certainly something which is crucial for the future of football all over the world. We cannot say football is global if then we exclude 80% of the world from the most important competition in the world.
The 13th CAF Extraordinary Meeting in Cairo presented to the world for the first time Togo. It's the official match ball for the Cameroon 2021 Africa Cup of Nations finals. The ball is named after a royalty outfit in the nation's northwest region that later became the traditional dress code for special occasions. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, still with that story, earlier we spoke with Hatem Maher, sports journalist with Ahram Online, which is based in Cairo, Egypt. We began by asking him what he thought of CAF's decision to back FIFA's plans to host the World Cup every 2 years as other confederations oppose the plan.
I believe that CAF, just like FIFA, only care about money. They only care about the revenue they can get from the World Cup. But in my opinion, this plan will ruin the spark of the World Cup and will totally affect the quality of the game. And money-wise, I think it will not be beneficial for them as they believe. Because simply, when you hold the World Cup every 2 years, the quality of the game will be affected, definitely, because people will be less interested in a biennial World Cup. They will be less enthusiastic to wait for the World Cup. When you wait for 4 years, you are eager to watch the tournament, especially when it's expanded to 48 teams. That will make it worse. To expand it to 48 teams and hold it every 2 years, in my opinion, this is completely nonsense. Big clubs in Africa would love the idea because simply it means more money for them. But at the same time, the small clubs who should be protected by CAF are the ones who will be affected the most. I think it's very unfair, just like what happened in the proposal for the European Super League. It's very unfair to give an advantage to the big teams at the expense of smaller ones. Sports is based on the merit of fair advantage. This means that you should earn it on the pitch. But an African Super League means that some of the big teams in the continent will be guaranteed their place in the tournament regardless of how they fare in the domestic competitions or in any other competitions. At the same time, if a small team punches above its weight and forces its way among the big clubs, it might be deprived of a place in the African Super League. And I'm not sure how will the African Super League be different from the African Champions League. The African Champions League already includes all of the big teams and the smaller ones, so it's a fair advantage. It's a fair competition in the African Champions League. So why we should hold or we should stage another tournament? It's only because of money. I believe it will eventually fail, just like what happened in Europe. I think Cameroon will be successful, even despite some concerns voiced by maybe CAF officials or some reports suggesting that Cameroon is not in the best shape. I think, although I am against CAF in a host of issues, but I think CAF will not take any risk over the hosting of the tournament. CAF has strict requirements that must be met. And that was evident 2 years ago when Cameroon was not ready. It was simply stripped of the host, and Egypt stepped in as a late replacement.
In the English Premier League, Steven Gerrard enjoyed his second straight win as Aston Villa's manager after his side claimed 2-1 victory at Patrick Vieira's Crystal Palace. But the